BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Andrew Petrie, and this is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, views and analysis you need on Monday, the 25th of August. First up, Russell Martin's Rangers stumble again.
There goes the final whistle, and it is 1-1 in Paisley, and for the third league game running under Russell Martin, Rangers have drawn 1-1.
3 points from 3 games, but not the end of the world, says the Rangers boss. On Saturday, we got an absolute humdinger at Tynecastle.
Goal! Braga again! Long with a hit, the keeper spills out, falls to Braga, back in the net, 3-3.
A dramatic draw between Hearts and Motherwell was the pick of the Saturday Premiership games. Down in the Championship, another defeat for Ross County cost Don Cowie his job.
Another wonderful goal for Partick Thistle on the counter. Fitzpatrick down the left-hand side, slots in Tony Watt as sharp as you like, ball across the face, and Logan Chalmers taps in at the back post.
We'll analyse all the weekend action shortly.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
I'm delighted to say I'm joined by current Livingston defender Ryan McGowan and the Daily Record's senior sports writer Scott McDermott. Gentlemen, there was some tremendous booing around Scotland this weekend. Ryan, I'll start with you. Where's the best booing that you've heard?
Oh, put me on the spot there. I think sometimes when you go to obviously Parkhead or Ibrox and you keep it tight for a little bit, I think just due to the size of both of those clubs and when the fans do get onto their backs. But to be fair, I thought the Celtic fans kind of stuck with the Celtic players at the weekend. There was a few kind of grumblings, but I thought after the midweek and with everything that's kind of seems to be going on off the pitch, I thought that they might have got on their players' backs a little bit earlier. But credit to them, they kind of stuck with them, and unfortunately for us, we couldn't hold them out and got beat.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to talk about that, unfortunately for you, Ryan. Scott, what about you? Where's the best booing?
Has to be the Rangers fans, doesn't it, today against St Mirren? I mean, it's becoming a bit of a regular occurrence for Rangers fans. I think they're doing more booing than singing at the minute. So, I think they've kind of cornered that market for the moment.
I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's where we're going to start Sunday's draw between St Mirren and Rangers. Ryan, you've played Rangers plenty of times, maybe not in the form that they're currently in. We're often told teams just kind of focus on themselves, but St Mirren seemed really, really confident going into that. Was that because of Rangers' current struggles, do you think?
I think yes and no. I think if you look at it, I think St Mirren historically, over the last couple of games, have done well against Rangers. I watched the game and I thought St Mirren were very good. As much as Rangers were poor, I thought St Mirren's press and the way they got after the Rangers players was really impressive. And not only that, when they kind of got into the final third, they really did carry a threat, and they made the sort of Rangers back four really uncomfortable. So, as much as I think everyone will be speaking about Rangers and how poorly their season has started, I think a lot of credit has to go to St Mirren, because they really did have a game plan and they executed it almost perfectly to get the 3 points. But I think especially that first half, the way that they pressed and the way that they harried and put Rangers under pressure. I'm not saying they smelt blood, but I think being at home team, playing Rangers the way that they're playing at the moment, they kind of really went for it, and I think the Rangers players struggled.
They certainly did. Scott, this is Rangers' worst league start in 36 years. Simply put, how does Russell Martin turn this around?
That's a big question, Andrew. I mean, in terms of the St Mirren game, I think most Rangers fans turning up in Paisley for that game almost had an idea in their head, or a vision in their head, of how that game was going to go for them. And I think that was the biggest challenge for Russell Martin, to make sure the game didn't end up like that. And I think he failed in that regard, because it felt like the game panned out as you expected it, in terms of the way St Mirren played, in terms of getting the front two involved, using their physicality, being direct. As Ryan says, Rangers couldn't really deal with that, especially in the first half. It was too slow again. It was too laboured. I feel as if you say that a lot about Rangers these days. And I'm even going into last season as well. It's a real issue for them. And look, do you give him a bit of credit for showing a wee bit of character, I suppose, in the second half and coming back and getting the goal? They maybe could have won it near the end, but as you say, 3 points for 3 games in the Premiership. I keep saying it. Look, when Russell Martin was appointed, at that day at his unveiling, he was very clear. He said that he was going to try and build something. He was going to have to change a lot of things, including a culture and a mentality. But he accepted that while doing that, he had to win games. And that just hasn't happened in terms of the league. And that's why the fans are so up in arms at the minute.
And the big story after the game, of course, was Russell Martin suggesting that Hamza Egemen refused to be subbed on. Ryan, if that was your teammate and the manager came out and said that after the game, how would you react?
I think first and foremost, I wouldn't want to be, I don't think I'd have players that I've played with that would put the rest of the group in that situation. I think, like Russell, or he said beforehand, changing the culture, and I think being in a football club or being in a dressing room, you can kind of spot those characters from a mile off, and it's up to the player's responsibility to make sure that those types of things doesn't happen. A lot of the blame does get landed at the manager or people above, but it's also your playing group. You are the ones that can influence them. You're the ones that can get them on side. I've been in plenty of changing rooms where boys have wanted to leave, where boys have handed in transfer requests, borderline down tools. It is up to that group to rally around him, and at the end of the day, you need them to be on board. I don't think he's helped his chances. I'm guessing that it's true. He's not helped his chances for any club that would be looking at it. If you're a club that's interested in him and you feel like he's behaving or acting like this way, then I just think personally it doesn't reflect well on him at all. And if I was his teammate, you'd be very angry and disappointed in that.
The thing that amazes me about that, Ryan, is we're not talking about a striker here that scored 20, 25 goals for 3 or 4 seasons for Rangers and maybe feels like he's entitled to a move or whatever. Now, I don't know how he's been advised, but I mean, his behaviour today is unacceptable. I mean, this guy, Egemen, he had a decent season last year. I mean, from memory, you're talking about 3 really good games against Hibs where he gets a hat-trick, Celtic where he scores, and Spurs when he scores in the Europa League. And all of a sudden, it seems from the outside like there's been a bit of speculation, obviously, over the summer about Leo being interested. It feels like it's totally turned his head, and suddenly he's got this kind of hit for himself that he thinks he can tell the manager that he's not playing. I think Russell Martin is right to call it out, and I agree with Ryan. I don't think Egemen's done himself any favours in terms of if he does want a move, because if I was a potential suitor, you'd be looking at that type of attitude. And even the way he's come back to Rangers in the summer, unfit, not ready to play. I just don't think it looks good all round at all.
And also, if you are going to be in that situation, you'd be man enough to admit it beforehand.
Yeah.
Say to him, if you are feeling that strongly that you want to leave the club or you don't want to be there, you knock on the manager's door and you tell him that so that he doesn't put you in the squad. You don't sit on the bench. He's obviously in a huff that he's on the bench. He's obviously in a huff that maybe he didn't come on at half time and he just went, I'm not coming on, I'm injured. To do that, I think's, even worse than if he went and handed in a transfer request and everyone kind of hated him and didn't want to do it. To really kind of throw your teammates and your manager under the bus, in the heat of battle is inexcusable, to be honest.
And I'm going to be a wee bit cynical here because after the game, Russell Martin described the current situation as not the end of the world. That's obviously not going to go down well with the fans, but no one's really talking about that at the moment. They're all talking about Hamza Egemen. Do you think, you mentioned Scott Russell Martin airing this publicly. Is there an element of deflection? Is there an element of taking the story away here? And, obviously everyone's going to talk about Hamza Egemen instead.
Yeah, I think there's a wee bit of that, Andrew. I think you'd be naive if you thought there wasn't. I mean, he seemed very keen, Russell Martin, to get that out there as soon as he could. I don't even know if he was asked in the press conference directly about Egemen or whether he offered it up himself. So I think there is a wee bit of that. It's obviously been a really poor start for them in the league. 6 points behind Celtic already. Still to win a game against teams, with all due respect, Motherwell, Dundee, St Mirren, Rangers really should be beaten. And they would have looked at that start to the league and think, we can get off to a flyer here. With a new manager, Celtic maybe not quite being ready themselves or quite at their best yet. So it was a chance for Rangers to get out the traps, albeit with new players and a new manager. And it just hasn't happened, and it's just increased the pressure. Obviously, they've got a big game in midweek, but I think the real big one for Rangers next week is obviously the Old Firm next Sunday. I mean, I suppose if you're trying to kind of find kind of positives for Russell Martin, I suppose if they beat Celtic next week, 3 points, get into the international break, maybe it isn't the end of the world, as he says, but at the moment, the way the Rangers fans leaving Paisley, the way they felt today, it feels like the end of the world, because it feels like, to them, it feels like there's just, he can't turn this around even this early, which is a big worry for them.
And as you say, a couple of really tough fixtures coming up, Club Brugge, then Hearts, then Hibs in the League Cup as well. And of course, that Old Firm on the horizon too. Ryan, you mentioned St Mirren. We've got to talk about them because they were really, really good today, even though obviously they didn't get the win and they've not had that win yet. A lot of people before the game were saying Paisley's a really difficult place to go and it really wasn't the fixture that Russell Martin would have wanted. Why is it so many teams hate going up against St Mirren at Love Street?
I think they just make it really difficult for you. I think it's a huge credit to Stephen Robertson and St Mirren as a football club is that you want opposing players and fans to not enjoy coming to your stadium, because that shows you that you are a good team. And I think they have gone under the radar in terms of being a top 6 club for 3 years in a row. Puts some of the other clubs in the league to shame. To have that sort of consistency isn't easy to get, and I think all credit goes to them. They kind of get direct, or kind of get thrown with being direct and physical, but that is part of the game. You are allowed to be physical, you are allowed to be direct. You don't have to be 100 passes before you can move it into another half, and that's the way that they play, and they're very good at it. And I think if you were to probably ask Rangers fans or St Mirren fans that were there today what one they would rather watch week in, week out, I think a lot of them would be saying St Mirren's style. So, as much as Rangers are getting slow and, laboured and not any desire, I think everything is the opposite for St Mirren. I think they get the ball forward quickly. They don't just hoof it and bang it up the park. I think even if you see the goal, it's obviously been worked on. They're in positions where they know where one another are moving, and that's down to good coaching. And I was really impressed with the way they pressed in the first half. You could see that there was key areas where Rangers passed it into, and there'd be 3 or 4 right biting at their heels and winning the ball back in really good areas. So I think, again, like I said earlier, as much as Rangers were poor and would be disappointed at that, I think a lot of credit has to go to St Mirren for how they played.
I think it's just hunger, Ryan. Hunger, appetite, desire. A lot of things that have been labelled against Rangers, I say, for the last couple of years. But St Mirren, without taking anything away from the football they play with an urgency and an intensity and as I say, a hunger and an appetite to go and win a game of football. And
the other thing is, sorry to cut you off, you would highly doubt that you would ever hear of a St Mirren player in that dressing room or in those couple of years refusing to come on.
Exactly.
And that just shows you the culture that Stephen Robinson's created, the togetherness, like you said, the hunger and desire to go out and be the best kind of player you can be for the club and themselves. And I think that's a big statement in terms of, if you're judging the two clubs as within the playing group as such.
Yeah, because that hunger and desire and appetite, it comes from within. I think it also comes from wanting to play for your manager. And I think that's what every St Mirren player wants to do.
Well, from a fantastic game in Paisley to an unbelievable game in Gorgie, potentially a game of the season contender as Hearts came from 3-0 down to draw with Motherwell. They could have even snatched a win at the end. Motherwell were magnificent in that first half hour. Scott, we've been talking about Rangers and St Mirren styles. Motherwell seem to have adapted to Jens Bertholascu's style pretty quickly and the way they want to play. How impressed have you been with them in the early stages of the season?
That's the biggest compliment you can pay them, Andrew, is how quickly they've adapted. I heard someone today saying, even going back to like the League Cup campaign, I think they lost a goal to Clyde when they were trying to play out. They kind of lost a goal. I think the goalkeeper got chipped or whatever when they were trying to play out. So there was obviously teething problems then, but that was very early. But to think they've done it so quickly and now look so impressive in that kind of style. I mean, I only seen the highlights of the game, but I mean, I heard Stephen Naismith on Sportscene saying, I think he said it was the best SPFL performance he'd seen ever from an away team at Tynecastle, which is some call. I heard Tam Cowan on the radio today, obviously Motherwell season ticket holder, saying it might be the best hour of football he's ever seen for a Motherwell team in terms of the passing. Certainly the third goal, when I watched the highlights, the third goal was outstanding. So look, they're looking good. Obviously they didn't win the game, so it's not all perfect. No, they allowed Hearts to get back in it and get the draw. But I think if you're a Motherwell fan, for it to be so aesthetically pleasing this early under a new manager, they must be really happy with that. And you think there's still a bit of progression and development in them, so it could get even better.
And as you mentioned, Hearts rescued that point in the end. Now, Derek McInnes made 2 changes at half-time. He made 3 at half-time the week before that against St Mirren, 2 the week before that against Dundee United. Ryan, is it just a case that he doesn't know his best 11 yet? And is that kind of to be expected from a new manager? Or is it because of the kind of influx of signings that there has been at Tynecastle?
I think it's probably a little bit of a combination of all of the above. He has said that he has probably a bigger squad than he may would have hoped. With those new players, you want them to have a game environment. You can train as much as you want. He probably will be wanting to see them, how they perform at a game, how they perform at Tynecastle, how they perform under the pressure of playing for Hearts. So he's probably trying to work out who he can trust and who he can believe can go out and do a job, all the while trying to refresh the team and see everyone. So it is a little bit of a juggling act, but I think there's 2 ways to look at it. He's making those substitutions because he can kind of hold his hands up and say that he's not picked his best starting 11. But then you can also look at it, that's why you have a squad or assemble a squad that if things aren't going well, you're able to make changes at halftime or last 30 minutes and bring on almost like for like quality. So Hearts have heavily invested in the squad, and it's up to McInnes now, I think, to really try and find out his best. It doesn't even have to be starting 11. It can be 14 or 15 players that he can really trust week in, week out, and then see how they get on from there.
And apologies, Ryan, because we're going to come on to Celtic Park and Celtic beating Livingston 3-0. Were you expecting a reaction from them after the disappointment of Wednesday night?
I think so. I think any Livingston player, I guess, that's going to Celtic Park is kind of hoping that Celtic have an off day and we have a really good day. So we were hoping if we could frustrate Celtic, obviously try and get the fans on their back a little bit after the midweek result. Obviously they made a huge amount of changes. I think it was 8 changes from the weekend. So we thought that, there was a possibility of a little bit of not on the same wavelength and players not having the patterns that they possibly do. But, I think the sort of one of the sort of most daunting moments of the game was probably around 60, 70 minutes when you look to the sidelines and there was McGregor, Forrest and Maeda ready to come on. So, from a Livingston point of view, we were disappointed. We wanted to, felt the first half we frustrated them without really getting out of our own half, and the second half was a little bit more of trying to stay in the game and then being able to make a couple of changes and probably put a little bit more pressure on. But we conceded a goal pretty much straight from kick-off in the second half, which kind of put us backs against the wall, and it's just kind of Celtic's quality really kind of shone through. And I think the manager was quick to say that our season won't be judged on our performances at Parkhead or Celtic Park, sorry. So we need to dust ourselves down and get ready for a huge game this weekend.
And Scott, for Celtic, obviously Ryan mentioned it was a much changed team. They'll get a boost from that result. Will it affect maybe the team selection at all that Brendan Rodgers has in his head ahead of that trip to Kazakhstan?
I don't think so. I think he probably knows his team for Kazakhstan, Andrew, and that was why he made so many changes. I mean, I just wonder, we kept Benjamin Nygren in at the weekend and he obviously had a huge impact on the game. I just wonder whether it was maybe in Brendan's mind to bring Engels or somebody else in for Nygren going to Kazakhstan, but no, Nygren's probably certainly played his way into the starting lineup again for Tuesday, and I think he's been a real positive for Celtic so far. He looks like a difference maker. looks as if he's settled really well. I think is that 3 goals now he's got already in the league. He scored at Petrie as well. So, I mean, amidst this there's a bit of a kind of negative narrative going around at Celtic at the minute due to the lack of transfer activity, and he's probably, along with Tierney, the only kind of real proper signing that they've made, and they can't complain with his contribution so far. He's been really good for them.
He certainly has. Well, the other Premiership game on Saturday was between Kilmarnock and Dundee. I had the pleasure of watching that 0-0 draw, and it was good editing on Sportscene because there really wasn't many chances. And because of that, we'll move right on to the Championship, where the big story is that Don Cowie has lost his job as Ross County manager after another defeat, this time to Partick Thistle. Ryan, are you surprised that Roy McGregor has acted so quickly?
Yes and no. I think in those situations, I guess, if you were a chairman, it would be the summer. I think if you were to let someone go, it would probably have to be in the summer. He's now waited 3 games into the Championship season, a week left in the window for someone to come in who in 3 weeks' time is going to turn to him and say, these are not my players that I've signed, and these are not, you start to get on that sort of merry-go-round of that cycle. So I think, if he wasn't or if he was unsure about Don Cowie for this season, I think he probably should have made that decision in the summer and allowed someone new to come in and bring his own players in and sort of get up to momentum, whereas whoever's coming in now is already under pressure. They're already sort of 2-3 games behind St Johnstone, who's at the top of the pile, and it's going to be difficult, with players that he's obviously not brought in. So I am surprised that they have done as poorly as they have been at the start of the season, but having experienced the Championship last season, it is a real grind of a league. It is a real league where basically almost every game, if you're the away team, you feel like that home team believes that they can win it, and I think that's a really a good competitiveness for the league. I think it makes the games quite exciting, and it was one that I really enjoyed last season playing in.
Well, given all the reasons that you've mentioned there, Ryan, do you think it's perhaps probably likely that John Robertson, the current assistant manager, will maybe step up to the hot seat?
Possibly, yeah. That might have been something that he thought in the back of his head when he came into the club in the pre-season. If it wasn't working out, sometimes a new figurehead or a new voice, can change the surroundings of the players. And I think if you're looking at their squad, they do have a squad that should be challenging at the top of the Championship and one that has every chance of coming back up. So that's something that I think they'll possibly be looking at and kind of steady the ship for the next couple of weeks. But with football these days, you absolutely have no idea what people are thinking.
You certainly don't. Right, finally, on to the Scotland national team. Steve Clarke will name his latest squad later today. Scott, who are you expecting to see in there? Any surprise inclusions, any surprise omissions maybe?
I don't think Steve Clarke really does surprises. Andrew, he's no one for wholesale changes. So, I don't expect it to be too different. I mean, obviously, I think Kieran Bowie came into the last squad. I'd be surprised if he wasn't involved again. His Hibs teammate Josh Mulligan, I think, is pushing to be considered. Unfortunately for him, as we know, it's Scotland's strongest area, that midfield, so really tough. Some top players struggling to get into that midfield. But I think he'll be one that's in his thoughts. Aside from that, I mean, guys like Max Johnson, again, I would expect to be involved. I think it might be too early for Aaron Hickey. I know he's come back after almost 2 years out. He came off the bench again for Brentford, but he's very much just kind of easing himself in. I'd be surprised if he was included for these 2 games. Obviously, these World Cup qualifiers come up in quick succession, September, October, November. So I think it might be the next international break when he comes back. So, I don't think wholesale changes, but I'd like to see younger players involved, like Johnson, like Mulligan, like Bowie. I think that just gives it a freshness.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. That's all we've got time for. Remember, we're here every day with another episode, so get onto BBC Sounds and get those push notifications turned on so you know when a new episode is out. All that's left to do is thank my guests, Ryan McGowan and Scott McDermott, and thank you for listening. I'm off to Belgium for the second leg of the Champions League playoff tie, where I'll be joined by Billy Dodds. Remember, that's live on Sports Sound from 7 o'clock on Wednesday. Goodbye, or as they say in Bruges, tot ziens. See you later.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.